As autumn deepened, a strange pull toward the old, forgotten building on the forest's edge began to stir within me. It had always loomed in the distance, a shadowy monument to some bygone era, with its stone walls cracked and cloaked in creeping ivy. People in town had their stories about that church, tales murmured at the diner or during late-night conversations. They said it was built over something ancient, something buried that should have stayed that way. But one evening, as I walked by the forest, something changed. The fog rolled in first, thick and silent, spreading between the trees and obscuring the familiar path home. It was a cold, damp mist, the kind that sank into your skin and made the world feel distant and strange. I continued along the edge of the woods, my mind wandering over the usual daily concerns, until the fog settled deeper, heavy with an unsettling stillness. The fog was thicker now, more suffocating, swirling in a slow, unnatural dance around the crumbling stone walls. I could barely see the roof now, just a jagged outline against the heavy mist. The iron gate stood ahead, rusted and half open, as though someone or something had invited me in. My heart thudded in my chest, a sudden unease creeping into my bones. The church had always been a distant curiosity, something that lingered on the edge of my consciousness, but now it seemed to pulse with some dark energy that I couldn't explain. For a brief moment, I thought about turning back. My feet were already shifting away, the sound of my footsteps muted by the fog, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. It was as though the place had called to me. The iron gate creaked open on its own when I pushed it, as though it had been waiting for me to arrive. A cold shiver ran up my spine, but my feet carried me forward, deeper into the fog, closer to the looming structure. The air was thick now, pressing against my skin, and I could hear the faint rustling of leaves in the distance, far away, as though the entire world beyond the church had fallen silent. The air inside the church smelled of old wood, mildew, and something far more sinister, like damp earth, like decay. It was almost suffocating in its stillness. The faint glow of candles flickered near the altar, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own, stretching unnaturally along the walls. It was dark inside, save for those few candles, their flames tiny against the vastness of the room. The place felt ancient, as though it had been abandoned for centuries. The faint sound of something a creak perhaps came from the direction of the altar, but I couldn't be sure. I told myself it was nothing, just an old building. But as I stood there, trying to gather my thoughts, I began to feel something else, something more tangible than just an eerie silence. The air, thick and heavy, began to close in around me. I could feel it pressing against my skin, tugging at the edges of my consciousness, pulling me deeper into the darkness. The candles flickered again, their light casting strange shapes on the stone floor. The whispers began faintly, like a distant hum in the back of my mind. At first, I told myself it was the wind, perhaps from the cracks in the ancient windows or the settling of the building. But the longer I stood there, the more insistent it became. It was like a voice, not a single one, but many. Low, guttural, drawn-out syllables that seemed to vibrate the space around me. They weren't words at first, just sounds, like the faint murmur of a crowd too far away to understand. But as the moments stretched on, they grew clearer. Leave. Leave. It was soft, but clear. My breath caught in my throat and I spun around, expecting to see someone. But no one was there. The place was empty, still. I moved closer to the altar, feeling the weight of the room on my shoulders. The floor creaked beneath my feet. I stopped, staring at the faded stained glass windows, their colors muted by years of neglect. I took a step back toward the door, but the moment I did, I froze. The door slammed shut. I whipped around to face the darkened interior of the church, my chest tight with panic. My breath came in quick gasps, the sound of it loud in the oppressive quiet. The whispers had returned, louder now, more insistent. I heard something else, 2 footsteps. Slow, deliberate. My skin prickled. Something was there. A cold draft swept through the room, and I heard the unmistakable sound of someone or something moving. I spun toward the source of the sound, but it wasn't a person. It was a shadow. A figure emerged from the darkness near the altar, and I could make out its shape only faintly, as though the shadows themselves were swallowing it whole. A tall, thin figure, its limbs too long, too disjointed, stretching unnaturally. It moved without sound, its form shifting like a cloud of smoke, so fluid it couldn't possibly be human. My breath caught in my throat as it drew nearer, its presence pressing against me, suffocating. And then I saw its face. It wasn't a face at all. It was a hollow, featureless void, black as pitch, the darkness inside it so deep it seemed to draw the light from the room. The thing didn't have eyes, but somehow I could feel it staring at me, like it was reading my every thought, every fear. I tried to turn and run, but I couldn't. The shadows were closing in, their long arms wrapping around my legs, my chest, my throat. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, the walls closing in, the air growing colder by the second. And then I heard it. A voice. It wasn't a whisper, but a roar loud and deafening, shaking the very walls of the church. The woman in white spoke, her voice like nails scraping against a chalkboard. You should have left when you had the chance. And the shadows closed in. I don't remember what happened after that. When I woke up, I was lying in the woods just outside the church, the first light of dawn peeking through the trees. My clothes were torn, my skin scratched and bruised. My head was pounding, as if the very night had tried to crush me into the earth. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak, unsteady, as though the ground beneath me was shifting and rolling, refusing to let me rise. My heart pounded in my chest, and the moment I tried to make sense of what had happened, the whispers returned, distant at first, like a far-off breeze rustling the leaves, but unmistakable. They were there, still lingering, watching. The voices twisted and tangled in my mind, sharp and insistent. My breath hitched as I staggered to my feet, struggling to get away from the church, away from that place. My head spun, the air around me thick and oppressive, as if the fog had clung to my skin, holding me in place. Somehow, I made it back home. The sun had risen, but the world still felt off, like it hadn't fully shaken off the shadows of the night. I stumbled through the front door of my house, my legs unsteady, my mind reeling from the images that clung to me like a curse. I had barely closed the door behind me when the familiar sounds of home, a quiet house, the soft rustle of wind outside felt far away. Too quiet, too still. The voices returned, closer now, no longer whispers but encircling me. You belong to us, they murmured. Always. I knew with cold certainty there was no escape. Not now. Not ever.